What does a woman do when the man she's built her entire life with decides, on a Tuesday afternoon in March, that she is disposable? I've asked myself that question every single day for the past 2 years, and I still don't have a clean answer. What I do have is this story, and the hope that maybe someone out there needs to hear it. My name is Maureen Elspeth Calloway, if we're being formal, which my mother always insisted on. I'm 41 years old. I work as a licensed occupational therapist at a rehabilitation center in Columbus, Ohio. And for 8 years, I was married to a man named Victor Sloan. Victor was the kind of man who made a good first impression on everyone he met. That's the thing about people like him. They save the worst of themselves for the people closest to them, for the ones who won't leave, or the ones they assume won't leave. We met at a fundraiser for a children's hospital. He was in commercial real estate. He had a firm handshake and remembered the names of the waitstaff, which I thought meant something. We dated for 2 years, got married at a vineyard in Virginia in September, and bought a 4-bedroom house in Dublin, Ohio, which is one of those suburbs that has good schools and a farmer's market on Saturdays and makes you feel like your life is going according to plan. For a long time, it felt like it was, but somewhere around year 5, something shifted. I couldn't name it exactly. It was more like a temperature change you only notice after the fact. Victor started working late more often. He started taking calls in his car, in the garage, at odd hours. He started making comments about money in ways he never had before. Not that we were struggling, we weren't. But he'd gotten cagey about our joint account, protective over the finances he'd always managed, a little too casual about mentioning that we should probably think about updating our estate plan. I didn't think much of it at the time. I was busy. I had patients to see, documentation to file, a house to maintain, a marriage to tend to. I told myself the distance between us was just stress, just life. I was wrong. It was a Thursday when everything unraveled. Victor came home earlier than usual, which surprised me because he'd been working late 3 nights in a row. I was in the kitchen when I heard his keys hit the counter with a sound that was somehow different, too deliberate, too prepared. He walked in and he didn't say hello. He stood at the edge of the kitchen, still in his coat, and he said, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to not make this into a whole thing." I set down the wooden spoon I was holding. I remember thinking very clearly, whatever is about to happen is going to change everything. "I've been speaking to an attorney," Victor said. "I want a divorce." I stood there for a moment, just stood there. And then I asked him why. He said, "And I want you to understand that I am not exaggerating. I am telling you exactly what he said." He said, "I've been doing the math, Maureen, and it doesn't work out in my favor anymore." Just like that. 8 years. And I was a math problem that no longer worked out. What followed was a conversation I'm not sure I can fully describe without making myself sick to remember it. He had clearly planned it. He'd already spoken to an attorney, his attorney, and he had a vision for how this would go. He would keep the house, he said. He'd been the one to find it, to negotiate the deal, to make the majority of the mortgage payments. He wanted me to sign off quickly and move on. I asked him if there was someone else. He paused. That pause lasted maybe 3 seconds, but I felt every single one of them in my chest. "That's not relevant," he said. So, there it was. I didn't scream. I didn't cry, not in front of him. I asked him, very quietly, to leave the room, and I sat down on the kitchen floor. The floor I had mopped 2 days earlier, and I breathed until I could breathe normally again. That night, I drove to my sister Annette's apartment on the east side of Columbus. I slept on her couch with a blanket that smelled like her dog Biscuit, and I stared at the water stain on her ceiling until the sun came up. I did not sleep. I did not eat. I did what a lot of women do in that first terrible night. I replayed everything, looking for the moment I should have seen this coming, looking for the thing I missed, looking for the version of this story where I could have prevented it. There is no such version. I know that now. The next morning, Annette made me coffee and sat across from me and said, "Okay, what are we going to do?" I didn't have an answer yet, but I appreciated the we. I hired my own attorney, a woman named Beverly Drummond, who had an office in Westerville and a reputation for being methodical and completely merciless. She wore reading glasses on a chain around her neck, and she didn't waste time on sympathy, which was exactly what I needed. She looked at what I'd brought her, the joint account statements, the mortgage documents, the records of what I had contributed over 8 years. And she said, "He's made some assumptions about you that I don't think are going to hold up." I asked her what she meant. She told me to let her get to work. Meanwhile, I moved the rest of my things out of the Dublin house and into a rental apartment in Clintonville. It was small, a one-bedroom on the second floor of an older building with windows that let in good light and radiators that clanged in the night. I found a second-hand couch and an area rug at Goodwill, and I put a plant on the windowsill, and I told myself that this was just a chapter, not the ending. Some days I believed that. Some days I sat on the second-hand couch and felt like I was 60 years old and starting from zero, and I allowed myself 20 minutes of that feeling before I made myself get up and do something. Anything. That was the rule I gave myself. 20 minutes, and then you move. I kept working. My patients needed me, and honestly, they saved me more than they'll ever know. There is something clarifying about spending your days helping people relearn how to button a shirt, how to climb stairs after a stroke, how to do the small things that the rest of us take completely for granted. It reminded me every single day that survival is not passive. It takes work. It takes showing up even when showing up feels impossible. About 3 weeks into the separation, I got a phone call from a number I didn't recognize. Columbus area code, but I didn't know it. I almost didn't answer. I'm so glad I did. The man on the other end introduced himself as Leonard Ashby, an estate attorney with Ashby and Klein in Cincinnati. He asked if I was Maureen Calloway, and I almost corrected him. I'd been going by Maureen Sloan for 8 years, but something made me say yes, that was me. He said, "I'm calling about the estate of Walter Pembroke." I had to sit down. Walter Pembroke was my mother's older brother, my uncle. He had never married, had no children, and had spent most of his adult life as an engineer for an aerospace company in Dayton. We weren't close. I'd seen him maybe a dozen times in my life, at holidays and family funerals, the kind of relative who exists mostly at the edges of your memories. He was quiet, precise, and kind in a way that didn't announce itself. He'd sent me a card when I graduated from graduate school with a check for $200 inside and a note that said, "Good for you, Maureen. Keep going." He had died 6 weeks earlier at the age of 78 from heart failure. I'd sent flowers to the service but hadn't been able to attend because I was in the middle of my own life falling apart. Mr. Ashby asked if I had time to come in and meet with him in person. I said I could be there the next morning. I drove to Cincinnati alone. I didn't tell Annette where I was going because I didn't want to say it out loud yet, as if saying it might make it less real, or more, and I wasn't sure which one I was afraid of. I drove south on I-71 with the radio off and tried to prepare myself for whatever this was. A small bequest, maybe, a sentimental item. Uncle Walter's watch, his engineering textbooks. Mr. Leonard Ashby was a small, careful man in his early 60s, with a desk so clean I wondered if he used it. He offered me coffee, which I accepted, and then he opened a folder and told me, without any particular drama, that Walter Pembroke had left his entire estate to me. The estate totaled a little over $4 million. I looked at him and I said, "I'm sorry, can you say that again?" He said it again. Walter Pembroke had spent decades living modestly, investing quietly, and compounding carefully. He owned his home outright. He had a significant portfolio. He had never spent lavishly, never made a show of it, and never told anyone what he had. The man I remembered as a distant figure at Thanksgiving had apparently been watching my life from a careful distance, and had decided, at some point, in some moment I will never know, that I was the person he trusted with everything he'd built. There was a handwritten letter in the folder. Mr. Ashby slid it across the desk to me. "Maureen," it said, "I know we weren't close. That was my fault more than yours. You've always worked hard and asked for nothing from anyone, and that matters to a man like me. I have no one else I trust to do something good with this. I hope it gives you options. You deserve options. Uncle Walter." I read it twice. Then I folded it very carefully and put it in my coat pocket, and I thanked Mr. Ashby for his time. I cried in the car for 25 minutes, which was 5 minutes over my rule, but I think Uncle Walter earned the extra 5. Here is where I need to tell you something important, because several people have asked me about this, and I want to get it right. In the state of Ohio, an inheritance received by one spouse is generally considered separate property, not marital property, as long as it is kept separate and not commingled with joint assets. I had not yet received a single dollar from Walter's estate at the time Victor filed for divorce. The inheritance had not existed legally as mine during our marriage. Beverly Drummond had already been building a strong case around the contributions I'd made to our marital estate. My income over 8 years, the unpaid labor of maintaining our home, the career opportunities I had declined to stay geographically stable for Victor's business. But now she called me after I told her about Uncle Walter, and she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Maureen, he can't touch it." "I know," I said. "He has no claim to a dollar of it." "I know," I said again. "I just want to make sure you understand that fully," she said, "because I think when he finds out, he is going to try very hard to make you feel otherwise." She was right. I don't know exactly when Victor found out about the inheritance. I suspect his attorney told him because suddenly the pace of the divorce proceedings changed. Suddenly, Victor was less interested in moving quickly. Suddenly, there were motions filed that seemed designed to slow everything down, and Cecily started getting text messages from Victor, casual at first, almost friendly, asking if we could talk, asking if we'd been too hasty, asking if I'd thought about what we were really throwing away. I showed the texts to Beverly. She told me not to respond. I didn't respond. What I found out later, through the discovery process, through documents his own attorney was required to produce, was that Victor had known, for over a year before he filed for divorce, that my uncle was ill. He knew because he had, without telling me, hired someone to look into my family's financial situation. I don't know exactly what he expected to find. What he found was Uncle Walter, a retired engineer in Dayton, with a surprisingly substantial estate, and a niece he clearly cared about. Victor had done the math, and the math had told him, "Get out now, before she inherits. Because once she inherits, you'll have to share everything you've built while potentially watching her build something you can't touch." It was calculated, every bit of it. The affair, Because yes, there was an affair with a woman named Simone who worked at his firm. That was real, but it was also, I came to believe, partly strategic. If he could establish fault, if he could muddy the picture, he might gain some leverage. But Ohio is a no-fault divorce state. Beverly had told me that from day one. Victor's personal choices were morally significant but legally marginal. He had outsmarted himself. That's what Beverly said, sitting across from me at the mediation table 6 months later, while Victor and his attorney sat on the other side with a counteroffer that was, frankly, embarrassing. Victor had assumed that I would be scared, that I would be in a financial position that made me desperate to settle quickly, that I would take less than I was owed just to be done with it. He had been wrong about me in a lot of ways, but this was the one that cost him. The final settlement gave me half of the marital assets, including a significant payout from the equity in the Dublin house. It gave me a fair division of the retirement accounts. It gave me a fresh legal record that cost Victor more in legal fees than he would have spent if he'd simply been honest with me 2 years earlier. The inheritance from Uncle Walter was mine, entirely and exclusively, as Beverly had promised. $4 million and change, sitting in a separate account that Victor Sloan had never had any legal right to and never would. I want to be honest with you about what came next, because I think there's a version of this story where I immediately flourish and everything becomes beautiful and easy, and that is not quite what happened. What happened is that I sat in my Clintonville apartment for a long time after the settlement, and I felt something I hadn't expected to feel. Not triumph, not even relief. What I felt mostly was tired. The deep bone tired that comes after you've been fighting for a long time, and the fighting is finally over, and your body suddenly remembers every single hit it absorbed along the way. I cried a lot in that period. Not sad crying, exactly, but the kind of crying that is more like pressure releasing, like a valve finally opening. I cried for the years I'd spent adjusting myself to fit around a man who had been planning his exit while I was still trying to build something with him. I cried for the version of my life I'd expected and wouldn't have. I cried for the woman I'd been at 32, standing in a vineyard in Virginia, genuinely believing she was starting the best chapter of her life, and then I stopped. Annette took me to dinner at her favorite Ethiopian restaurant on High Street, and we ate with our hands, and she told me about the first time she'd been genuinely heartbroken, at 24, over a man named, well, that's her story, not mine. And she said something I have not forgotten. She said, "The worst part of being betrayed isn't losing the person. It's losing the version of yourself who trusted them, and the work isn't getting that version back. It's figuring out who you are now without her." I thought about that for a long time. I am still thinking about it. What I can tell you is what I did next. I kept working at the rehab center because I love it, and it is mine in a way that has nothing to do with money. I started seeing a therapist named Dr. Portia Webb, who helped me understand that what happened to me was not a reflection of my worth or my judgment, but of Victor's character, a character I'd had limited information about because he had worked hard to conceal it. I bought a house, a smaller house than the Dublin one, in Bexley, with a backyard and a porch and a kitchen with windows that face east. I put plants on every windowsill. I have a dog now, a 3-year-old mutt from the Franklin County shelter named Clover, who sleeps at the foot of my bed and greets me at the door every day like I am the most important person in the world, which is, honestly, a level of enthusiasm I find deeply healing. I put a portion of Uncle Walter's inheritance into a charitable fund in his name, supporting STEM education for kids in Dayton. It felt like the right thing to do with it. He spent his whole career as an engineer and never made noise about it, and I wanted to make a little noise for him. The rest I have managed carefully, which is something he would have respected. I saw Victor once, about 8 months after the settlement, at a grocery store in Worthington. He was with Simone. She looked uncomfortable. He looked like he'd aged 5 years. He saw me across the produce section, and his face did something complicated that I didn't try too hard to interpret, and I put my avocados in my basket and I walked the other way. I did not feel what I expected to feel, which was anger, or satisfaction, or grief. I felt, mostly, nothing, just the clean blankness of something that is finally over. What I want to say, what I most want you to take from this, if you're listening and you're somewhere in the middle of your own version of this story, is that the people who move against you when they think you're vulnerable have usually made a very significant error in judgment. They have looked at you and seen someone who can be outmaneuvered. They have not seen you clearly. Victor saw a woman who would panic. A woman who needed the settlement more than the truth. A woman who could be pressured into accepting less than she was owed. He did not see me. People who scheme against the people who trust them most are, in my experience, ultimately terrible strategists. They optimize for the short game and they miss the long one entirely. They are so focused on what they can take that they never stop to reckon with what they're actually destroying, or what they're actually up against. Uncle Walter saw me. He saw me clearly, across decades of distance, and he decided I was the one he trusted. And whether or not I believe in anything larger than coincidence, I find something meaningful in the fact that his decision and Victor's decision arrived at nearly the same moment. One designed to diminish me, and one designed to give me options. The diminishment didn't work. The options were real. My name is Maureen. I am 41 years old. I have a porch and a dog and a job I love and east-facing kitchen windows and an inheritance from a quiet man in Dayton who wrote me a letter that I have kept in my nightstand drawer since the day Mr. Leonard Ashby slid it across his clean desk. You deserve options. He was right. And so do you.